of Zoom. That was partly my intent this morning. I had originally planned to present some sort of video background to talk over, and that wasn't working. Technology was just beyond me. So yesterday or the day before, I thought to myself, well, I live right next to Lake Michigan. Why not take advantage of that and use that as the background? So I went down there this morning and tested everything out, and was able to talk over the wind and the sound of the waves. And you saw me sitting down there, perhaps sitting on some rocks, getting everything set up as we started. And it took a while before the camera kicked in. And then even though I had my phone charged to 100%, apparently just using the camera for a few minutes shot the battery completely out. So my phone died, and I ran back over here to the house to at least get on the laptop. Well, of course, the laptop was dead too. So the point is, I'm here, and just rather than having a nice background or something for you to look at, it's just my face. So, Chuck, I didn't get a chance to see the order of service that you had up earlier. That's about the time that my phone went out. Did you want me to do the sermon now or the message now or something else first?
Yeah, you can just go ahead and take it over and do your presentation, and then we'll wrap it up.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I used to think that I knew how I wanted to die. I was once hiking the Appalachian Trail through New England and in New Hampshire. I was on Mount Washington in the White Mountains along the Presidential Ridge. Mount Washington is a high, rugged mountain where erratic weather, snowstorms in August, winds in excess of 100 miles an hour out of nowhere is the norm. Now, all of the wind and rain and snow collects at the alpine apex, an annual average of nearly 100 inches of rain and snowmelt. So the mountain is covered with magnificent waterfalls and ravines fed by runoff from the Lake of the Clouds. I was at one such ravine on the Ammonoosuc River on the western slope, lying on a hump of dirt and grass that jutted out above the cataract and afforded an excellent view downward toward Vermont and Lower Canada. I was taking a photo of my hiking partner, who had straddled another higher rock jutting out from that hump, when I felt the rock that I'd planted my foot against suddenly give way. And I slid. In my mind, I went shooting off the hump and straight down the ravine. It was a long way down, and I saw the trees and brush and birds in glorious detail. My feet struck slick boulders just before they accordioned up to my chin. Now, in reality, I'd only slid about 3 feet, but that was enough. In my mind, just as I hit those rocks, I thought, this is a fine death. Well, almost everybody dies. Everybody does die. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what to do with my hands.
Why don't you sit back and then you can have a little bit more air to your pushing on your diaphragm.
That stands to reason. Almost everyone should die in about the same way. Wouldn't you think that? Now, the Population Reference Bureau, whose unenviable task it is to calculate these sorts of things, has determined that nearly 108 billion people have been born and died in the 6 million years that science estimates people have been crawling and hobbling around on the earth. They've determined through statistics, mathematics, algorithms, and observation that there is a 100% certainty that if you are born, you will die. That's the truth about life that when you're old enough to get into it. None of us gets out of this alive. Amazingly, among that nearly 108 billion, there remains some variation. There are as many unique ways to die as there are to live. Some of us die alone. Some of us are surrounded. Some of us die by violence, some by our own hand, some by accident, and some by the slow accrual of time and entropy. Each of our deaths are as unique as our fingerprints or our dreams. We long, all of us, once we admit to ourselves that we will die, for a good death. Now, it might sound strange to put it that way, but in hospice, we always hope everyone experiences a good death. What's that? Well, that's entirely up to you. I have at least one friend who's expressed the wish that if a nuclear bomb takes us out, he wants it to hit him square on the head. He wants to die fast and easy, no wish to live on in a post-apocalyptic anything or to watch his loved ones and his friends die agonizing deaths. Another friend once said that if he contracted cancer or AIDS or something incurable, take out a platinum credit card and use it to travel around the world, and then succumb to his illness just as the mail delivered the bill to his home. I'm pretty certain credit cards already have anticipated that kind of thing. I'm not so certain now that my experience on Mount Washington is the same way that I'd like to go. Working with hospice patients, I often talk about good ways to die. Some would like to die immediately and without knowing, like from a bullet or getting hit by a bus. Others are glad to have had the opportunity to talk with relatives that they hadn't connected with, in some cases, for decades. Still others, of course, curse the length of time it can take a sick person to die. Many people lose their faith in a personal, loving God when they find their breathing and cognition outlasting, sometimes by months or years, their ability to move without pain or to communicate simple things like eat, sleep, toilet. I suspect my mother, who died a decade ago, had what most of us would think is a good death. She had breast cancer the last 15 years of her life, and those were hard years, but that isn't what killed her. My dad woke up one morning to find that she wasn't in the bed next to him, but was face down on the floor in the living room. Mom had had a habit of getting up in the night to sit in her recliner for a few hours to respite her back after it began aching. The coroner ruled she had stood up from the chair, maybe a little too quickly, and had a heart attack. He claimed she was dead before she hit the floor. Now, sometimes I've described hers as a good death because in those final 15 years, our family and her friends had the opportunity to see her and speak with her, reminisce with her, tell her what she meant to us. Sometimes people can't believe I'm as comfortable with her death as I say that I am, but there was nothing left between us. No words unspoken, no undelivered messages. I loved her, she loved me, and we let one another know how deeply we felt. And then she died. There's another sense too, in which that was a good death, and that's the lengths to which I discovered, to my surprise and probably to his too, just how good a caregiver my father could be to her. I'll never forget the image of him the winter before she died, dressing her for an outing in the cold and adjusting the scarf around her neck just so, and then bundling the top button of her coat gently under the scarf so that the wind wouldn't whip under it. We all want, whether we admit it or maybe more importantly when we don't, a death that's good, whether it's good in terms of its painlessness, its ease, its meaningfulness, or its message. But the truth is that no one can give us that, especially not in the way most of us mean it. For most of us, a good death means we die painlessly, unknowingly in our sleep, without prolonged illness, without having felt any pain, without maybe even knowing that we were ill. One of my patients, a bitter Vietnam vet who had antagonized all of his family and loved ones away and lay more or less comatose in a facility bed, surprised me. Despite his anger, he had become a Buddhist. And as I was sitting with him, holding his hand, knowing that death was coming soon, I looked for a sutra, an appropriate sutra, to read to him on my cell phone. I suddenly realized that his breathing, which had been rasping and guttural for quite a while, was suddenly quiet. I was still holding his hand, which grew very, very cold. He had died so gently that I hadn't even noticed it. That's the kind of death most of us want. It happens shockingly rarely. The percentage hovering around 4 or 5. This means that of every 100 people, 4 or 5 are going to die in that way. To give you a better idea of this, imagine 100 of us are qualified to apply to Princeton. We all have top grades, excellent application essays, impressive recommendations, sound extracurricular and community activities, and all 100 of us are capable and deserving. 5 of us will get in. If it's any consolation, neither will most of us die a violent death, not from terrorist attacks or stabbings or violent accidents, shark attacks, lightning strikes, air crashes, radiation poisoning, falling through the ice, or someone intentionally dropping an electric fan into our bath. These are very rare. Most of us will die in the hospital or at home. An interesting turn after a century of many, if not most people dying in hospitals, often separated from friends and family, there's been a tremendous resurgence in the last 20 years of the way that most people used to die at home in their own beds. Most of us will die from the complications of disease, usually heart disease or cancer. However, COVID-19 has crept up the stats. According to some metrics, it is now the 3rd leading cause of death in the US, outstripping diabetes and strokes. How will we die? Well, again, there are at least as many variations on the act of dying as there are in living, but there are characteristics that we can call constants, in the same way, I suppose, that school education is a constant. There's a booklet that I like to give to families when we admit someone into hospice called Gone From My Sight, The Dying Experience. It was published in 1986 by Barbara Carnes, a hospice nurse, and has gone through many revisions. It presents what most people experience during their final days in a non-sensationalistic, understandable manner, using plain language. Now, I caution patients and their families that there's no timetable to death. The periods that Carnes refers to are a general outline of when some things happen. They may not happen at the time. They may not happen in that order. They may not happen at all. Carnes characterizes 1 to 3 months prior to death as the period of withdrawal. It's not unusual for those first glimmers of our actual mortality, the sense that this is it, to send us into a spiral of separation from everyone and everything else. We might become irritable or serene. We're slipping into a cocoon and there's no room for grandchildren, children, or other loved ones. We might peep out at them, enjoy their presence for a little while, but really we're focused on ourselves. We sleep more often and longer, little naps here and there, several a day. It may seem as if we're bored, but our interior life has taken on tremendous interest to us. We don't feel the need to communicate with other people. Carnes writes, words lose their importance. Touch and wordlessness take on more meaning. Now, we might stop eating. This is often very hard for families to understand or accept. In many cultures, there's still a certainty that so long as we're eating, we're alive. I don't know how many times I've heard, if only she'd eat, she'd feel better. But nothing tastes good, or only certain things, sour balls, ice cream, bacon, citrus. Some things taste good. Meat is usually the first thing to go, and then other hard to digest foods like vegetables. We'll stick with soft foods longest, but eventually we'll stop eating those too. At 1 to 2 weeks, people begin to show signs of disorientation. We sleep even more often, longer periods, deeper naps. It's almost like a hibernation, some patients say. We talk to people who aren't there and about events that nobody recognizes. We start picking at imaginary threads or hairs. Our arms or our legs seem agitated, and they move without our volition. Our blood pressure goes down, our pulse goes up, or it may seem to stop altogether. We sweat a lot more, and when people hug us, back when they could hug us, they remark afterwards how clammy we feel. We want the windows open because we're burning up, or more blankets because we just can't get warm. Our skin changes color. We seem pale and flushed, blue, like we're freezing. Our extremities are often blue because the heart is no longer pumping the way it used to and blood can't reach there. It might be harder to breathe, so we need external oxygen. We might breathe faster, like we're always racing, and we'll hack and we'll cough, but nothing comes up. Finally, at 1 to 2 days and in the final hours before death, we may have a surge of energy, what hospice workers call a spike. We might sit up all night, drinking and laughing with friends who've come by. We want a plate of fried potatoes and a rare steak, and we eat every single bite. Loved ones look at this and say, he's over the worst. We are, but not in the way that they mean it. We get more restless, but we take to our bed. We collapse. Breathing is slower, less regular, sometimes stopping altogether for nearly a minute. We sound congested, loudly congested, the way we did as kids with a croupy cough. Our eyes are open, but we don't see anything or recognize anyone. We might respond to sounds or voices or movements, but we can't identify them, and we've stopped responding at all, except for the occasional grunt or moan. This doesn't show that we're in pain usually. It's just the air moving around our lungs and our throats. Our hands and feet turn purple. The heart can't pump blood that far any longer. Joints become blotchy, and because we're lying down, blood starts to pool on the underside of our arms and legs, our backs, our buttocks, and we stop responding altogether. In the final minutes before death, there's often the sort of gasping you see when fish are out of water. It's called Stokes breathing. And we can't be awakened or aroused. This is often the hardest time for the family because they can see the end and they want to be there, but this experience can last for hours. Sometimes when our family just can't hold off going to the bathroom any longer, we take that opportunity when we're alone to finally just stop. We all die, and we all die in our own time. It may sound sad and it may seem sad, but it isn't to the person undergoing it. It's just what they're going through, and they're beyond any considerations of whether they want to do it. Joan Halifax, in Being with Dying, writes of Danon Katagiri Roshi. When he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, Katagiri's students came from far and wide to be with him and help. But they were also frightened and confused at the thought that their teacher was subject to ordinary human frailty. One day, he called his students to his bedside and he said, "I see you're watching me closely. You want to know and see how a Zen master dies. I'll show you." Katagiri kicked his legs wildly and flailed his arms in alarm, crying out, "I don't want to die! I don't want to die!" And then he stopped and looked at them. "I don't know how I will die. Maybe I will die in fear or in pain. You must remember, there is no right way." Now, when I had written this sermon originally, 4.5 years ago, I give you some indication of how quickly time flies. I was sure it was only 1.5 years. This was all a different time and a different place. We had some sense back then of who we were and what our future probably contained. The past 4 years have upset the apple cart politically and spiritually. And the last 8 months have tamped the dirt on our discomfort, stepped back, and dusted off its hands. We are existentially adrift. And along with everything else, even our sense of how we might expect to die or what we might expect to die from has been upended. Not all of us can look forward to a death that we want. But like Fred Rogers' mother famously said, when scary things are happening, look for the helpers. If there is one certainty that in my half decade plus working in hospice has given me, it is that there will always be helpers. People who see their work as a calling to ease the pain and suffering for others as they die. There will always be fear, always uncertainty. There will always be death. There will also always be those whose role it is to help us through it. If for no other reason than that we hope later someone else will do the same for us. In a study from a few years ago, behavioral scientists found that if it's in their power, rats will find a way to relieve pain in other rats, even if they aren't nestmates. We can do no less. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. That gives us a lot to talk about and think about. Let's just take a moment of silence, and then maybe Bob can field some reflections and questions. Okay. I'm not sure how to stop the spotlight here. Remove spotlight. There we go. I have a question before other people chime in, I guess. After the fact of death, and people feel a natural need to gather to honor the deceased and everything. I'm always surprised at a lot of times how much laughter there is. Once everybody's kind of resigned to the fact that this person that they loved has passed, they start to share stories, and that's just the energy in the room. For some reason, Kitty is sharing her screen. Okay, there we go. Anyway, can you remark on the power or the presence of humor along with in the process and of dying and that sort of thing?
One of the things that I've read about are studies that show that hearing is the very last thing, the very last sense that goes for us. And I often counsel families for patients who are in comas or non-responsive, that one of the most calming things for them, and again, this is according to some studies, is hearing the sounds of people laughing, telling stories, telling jokes, talking with each other, even if it's not to the patient, even if it's not regarding them at all. And some studies, again, suggest that even if the patient can't hear what's being said, to make it out as words or understand their meaning or identify who it is who's talking, they can hear the tone. And laughter is one of the most relaxing tones that we have, that we can hear. Not laughter like we're being made fun of, but genuine laughter in some at something, even if we don't know what the joke is. Just hearing people laugh